This is the Tom Baby Tales, and I'm your host, Shannon Evans. I write about a small town in northeast Mississippi called Columbus, and sometimes I write about the rest of the state. This episode is titled The Murder of Edward Sims, a dark chapter in Mississippi civil rights. Let's start with the Jim Crow era in Mississippi. In the 1940s, Mississippi was a deeply segregated state where systemic racism permeated every aspect of society. Law enforcement and judicial systems were particularly brutal towards Black citizens, with local authorities wielding unchecked power to intimidate, abuse, and exploit African American communities. This case represents a critical moment in Mississippi's civil rights history in the 1940s. It provides us with a look into a rare prosecution of white law enforcement for racial violence. It provides us with documented evidence of systemic abuse against Black citizens, both in the press and in the legal system. And it highlights the extreme dangers that were faced by African Americans in the Jim Crow South. Let's begin. In 1943, Sheriff William Jacob Probst Sr. arrested several Black men in Lowndes County for the suspicion of burglary of James McCrary Jr.'s store. Probst was born in Alabama and a former semi-pro and a very short-lived, as in played one game, of pro baseball. He had made Columbus his home. Probst ran for and was elected sheriff of Lowndes County in 1940. In June of 1943, a total of 8 men were arrested. 6 of them were sent immediately to the county work farm on the river. 2 others that were arrested were held separately, but also on the river. Their names were Elbert Chunk Stewart and Edward Bunk Sims. So Elbert, and they were met at the work farm by Sheriff Probst, Deputy Flem Goolsby, and James McCrary Jr. and his relatives Ellis and his father, James Ambrose McCrary. When labor was needed on county work farms, it was the practice of the foreman of the farm to notify the justice of the peace, either John Cotton or Mrs. Franks, who was the other J, of their need. The justices would then send out the constable to round up Black males who were considered derelict or who were in between jobs, which also meant they were derelict in their definition. And those men would be given anywhere from 30 days to 6-month work camp sentences right there on the spot. There was no true adjudication, no trial, no nothing. They were just sent off to the county work farm. This was also a reason many cases of suspected crimes were prosecuted in rapid court sessions so that the county farm had the needed laborers for the week's work. These incidences like this were racial oppression. It shows us that they were very much using arbitrary arrest practices. The use of these work farms was a form of legal slavery for the county, and it systemically dehumanized the local Black citizenry and kept the Black citizenry in the white judicial system's mind under control and out of trouble. It is thought that on this incident, with these men being arrested, these 8 men were caught up in the sheriff's burglary sweep was just another excuse to fill up the county work farm so that there were people there that could do the work. When we look at the 8 men who were arrested, 6 of them were just placed in the work farm and sent off to go do hard labor. 2 of them were held back. One of them was was one of the 2 that I named earlier. His name was Elbert Stewart. Now, he was a 54-year-old carpenter who lived with his wife and children and grandchildren on Bell Avenue on the south side of Columbus. Sims, on the other hand, was a young man. He was a 19-year-old carpenter, and he, like Stewart, were working for the C&G Railroad as a carpenter, and he lived also on the south side of Columbus. He was the son of Frank and Amelia Hood Sims, both originally from Alabama. On the night in question, June 30th, 1943, Probst and Deputy Cole took Chunk Stewart to their river camp, where the work camp was, and in a makeshift cell, they started beating Chunk, trying to get a confession out of him that he was one of the ones who had broken into this James McCrary store. Probst and Cole stomped Stewart's hands so that they were broken and twisted. Then they took a whip and tied Stewart over a barrel before lashing his back so much that they removed a strip of skin from his back that was 18 inches long and 12 inches wide. They apparently then took photos of their handiwork. The McCrarys were given Edward Sims, the 19-year-old, and they were allowed to beat him to, quote, get a confession from him. He was beaten so badly by the McCrary boys that they broke his neck and he was paralyzed from the neck down. Goolsby kicked Sims in the neck and broke his neck, and Sims was then paralyzed from the neck down. He was sent back home, and his family sent him to the hospital, and the county refused to pay his $800 hospital bill. Local white citizens were horrified to learn of these two men's brutal injuries. They demanded an investigation. They paid the bonds of these men. The person who paid them was Mrs. Grover Barrow. James Grover Barrow was a cabinet maker who worked with Stewart and Sims. They also somehow got pictures of Chunk's back and sent those to a Judge Stennett, who I believe was a federal judge. That judge then called for federal investigators to go to Columbus to investigate allegations of civil rights violations of Black prisoners. 9 white citizens were initially indicted. They were Sheriff William Jacob Probst, Deputy William Luther Cole, Deputy Flem Goolsby, Deputy William Dewey Hall, Deputy J.B. Partain, Deputy Cully Winston Walters, James McCrary Jr., Ellis McCrary, and James Ambrose McCrary. According to the Biloxi, Mississippi Sun Herald, March 23, 1944 edition, a federal grand jury in Oxford, Mississippi returned indictments charging Probst and jailers Cole, Goolsby, and all 3 McCrarys of conspiring to deprive Black prisoners of civil rights. The indictments charged the men with whipping, beating, and otherwise mistreating prisoners in offenses occurring between June 26th and July 29, 1943, when 6 Negro prisoners were beat. A second indictment charged Probst and Cole with, quote, whipping and beating 2 other Black prisoners to obtain a confession. The maximum penalty for their conviction would be 1 year and $1,000 per count. According to the April 22, 1944 Jackson Advocate, the men pled guilty and were given fines and suspended sentences of 18 months. Probst and the McCrarys were fined $500 each, Goolsby $200, and Cole $100. Probst and Cole were given an additional sentence of 2-year probation for beating Stewart and Sims for confessions. While these are minor penalties for such heinous crimes, these convictions in federal or state court in Mississippi were unheard of in this era of Jim Crow. It was extremely rare that a white law officer was indicted, much less convicted, for abuse of a Black person. Probst lost his re-election bid for sheriff in 1945, but he did later run for and serve as mayor of Columbus from 1954 to 1957. He died in 1967, age 71, and is buried at Friendship Cemetery, plot 937. Elbert Stewart, one of the victims, died in 1963 and is presumed to be buried in Lowndes County, Mississippi. Sims, the one whose neck was broken, would eventually be hospitalized in Memphis for his injuries on January 1st of 1944. Per his Tennessee death record, he died in the hospital on January 7th, 1944. His body was returned to Columbus, Mississippi for burial at Pilgrim's Rest Missionary Baptist Church. This case became one of many catalysts that would eventually fuel the broader civil rights movement, exposing the brutal realities of racial injustice in not only Columbus, Mississippi, but all over the American South. I want to thank you for coming on my podcast, The Tombigbee Tales. Until next time, I'm Shannon Evans.